The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of inchastity causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I'll be the first to confess when I have made a mistake or when I've learned something new that changes a previous belief. Well, no, that's not really right. I don't always do that. Wait, I think I just did. Anyways, I guess I should say I try to be the first to confess when I've made a mistake or when I've learned something new that changes a previous belief. It seems like this happens most often, at least for me, when it comes to learning and experiencing what God is doing. I'll stand up here and say something with such certainty, such confidence in believing what God means or says, when all of a sudden, I once again realize and remember that there is always more to learn. God is always flipping the script on us. Forever and ever, I feel like I've shouted from the rooftops that our life of faith with God is not simply an either-or kind of life. There's more than two sides to the story. There's more than just a this is right and this is wrong understanding of what God is doing in our world. I've always said that there's nuance and so many pieces of the puzzle that often make things less than definitive. But then God comes along and smacks me upside the head and says, again, there is more to it. Or maybe in this case, there's less to it. I'm not sure yet. So let's look at today's readings. In Deuteronomy, we hear that Moses said to the people, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity." As we start out this reading, I'm hearing this this put forth this wide range of experiences, something that can include life and death together, prosperity and adversity overlapping from time to time. But then Moses keeps going. And he continues to say, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. As this prophecy continues, it feels like God is narrowing in on us to make a specific choice, one or the other, a choice of something that stands in stark contrast to something else. A choice where we choose one or the other, but maybe not both. So Moses continues, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. So is there a both and in this case? Like I've always believed there is? Doesn't sound like that. Because the very last words of God's prophecy that Moses is leaving with the Israelites before they entered the promised land is this encouragement to choose life. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him. Suddenly it's sounding like there's not much wiggle room in this. If you choose covenant, you receive life, but then if you reject covenant, you receive death. If you choose covenant, you gain land. If you reject covenant, you lose land. Choose covenant, receive blessing. Reject covenant, receive curse. To some hearers, I'm sure this cut and dry choice comes at no surprise. 0 questions. We know this. Choose life, go to heaven. Choose death, go to hell. That's the Word of God. That's the synopsis of the whole Bible. That's the way it is. To some hearers, then, there's also a question bubbling up of where does the grace of God work? Through Jesus Christ, where does that come into play here? I know there are plenty of days where I wake up with the complete intentions of choosing life in all that I do, all throughout the day. But then at some point in that day, usually once I get out of bed, my actions start to reflect the latter. And the best that I end up being able to do is beg Jesus for forgiveness. I imagine none of you have that problem either, so you're probably looking at me and thinking, you poor, poor soul. But that's why this distinct choice, life or death with no in-between, seems to weigh heavily on me. So I do what I often do, and I turn to the words of the gospel where Jesus may or may not have something comforting to say about all of this. Our gospel reading today continues from the teaching that we've been hearing the past 2 weeks from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's gospel. We started 2 weeks ago with those Beatitudes, those pronouncements of blessedness upon those who are least expected to carry that kind of blessing. The poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, etc., etc. Jesus' sermon continues then, as we heard last week, with him telling those who are listening that they are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and so go and be who God created you to be. At this point in the sermon, it feels like Jesus is taking a bit of a turn, though some would argue that that's the whole point of the Sermon of the Mount. So maybe it's more about Jesus flipping the script on his listeners. And so he says, you have heard it said. Jesus begins with that 4 different times. You have heard it said that you should not murder. You should not commit adultery. Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. You shall not swear falsely. But then each time he goes on, but I say to you. 4 times to each of those 4 original commands, Jesus flips it on us. But I say to you. Okay, ready for that? Okay, this must be where the zinger comes, when Jesus is going to tell us that these commandments from the Jewish tradition are old and dusty and that there's some other and better way to follow. Except we need to remember that at the end of last week's passages, just before he starts into these commandments, Jesus tells the crowd, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law and prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Fulfill, as I'm sure you know, means to bring to completion or reality, to follow through or bring about or make happen. When Jesus says he's come to fulfill the law set before us, he's making these laws reality. He's bringing forth a community of believers who embody and fulfill among themselves the heart of these commands. But I say to you, does not negate the laws, it deepens them. You have heard it said, but I say to you. So what does that mean for these 4 commands that Jesus brings to his listeners? When we hear the command to not murder, that's more than just not killing another person. Instead, we need to think deeply about how not to be angry with another person, or how not to insult them or hurt their character. But then, if some of that has already occurred, how do we repair or restore the relationship once it's broken? You've heard the command to not commit adultery, but also think how much damage you can do just by thinking about what you can do. What happens inside of you is just as powerful in damaging a relationship between 2 people as what can happen through our actions. You've heard about divorce and making oaths, but let's think more deeply about who we are making vows to and how they affect each other. Brokenness certainly happens and does happen, but the breaking of these relationships is not to be taken lightly. How is everything that we do caring for our relationship with God and with those around us? How is everything that we do building a new and faithful community together? How is everything that we do a way of choosing life? Both Moses' prophecy of God's choice that's laid before us and Jesus' expansion of the laws and commands that come from God show us that God is doing a new thing and that God is making a new way in this world. It shows us that sometimes this new way is actually calling for us to be nice or show compassion to another human being. Imagine that. Guess God knows more about us than we care to admit. You've heard that it was said, or you may think that this world has a stranglehold on you and there's no hope and no love and no peace that can spring forth anywhere. But I say to you, choose the way of life. Follow God's commands. Witness what God is up to. Experience the new ways that Jesus teaches. Nurture and grow relationships that embody care and compassion for the other person. Shine into this world a new way, an unexpected way, a way contrary to what the world expects from us. And then you and this beloved community will then know a life that you've never known before. There is always more to learn. God is always flipping the script on us. And we and the world are always better because of it. Amen.